The house on East Walker Street remained sealed in dust, quiet in a way that felt paused rather than abandoned, the air still holding the texture of 1981 as if it had never permitted time to move beyond that autumn evening. The floors rested under a thin layer of gray, the kind that softens edges and blurs memory, and the investigator's steps disturbed nothing but the shallow hush that lived there. He did not switch on the overhead light. He simply allowed the dimness to remain, respecting it, acknowledging that the space had its own stillness and that his presence was secondary to the evidence waiting within it. Each object felt suspended, preserved in thought rather than function, and the walls carried the muted resonance of a life that had ended without conclusion, but not without trace. Her name was Maribel Cline, age 28, a librarian who had arrived in Oklahoma 3 years earlier from a quieter town, where history seldom escalated beyond local rumor. She had been known for her methodical habit of cataloging everything: dates of rainfall in her small notebook, names of patrons who returned overdue literature, entries in archival drawers she reorganized as if classification could grant clarity to daily living. She existed in precise lines, soft gestures, and unassuming promise. Nothing about her suggested a life that would one day be reopened, analyzed, revisited, and yet the file bearing her name had rested in cold storage for decades, waiting, undisturbed but not forgotten. The investigator pressed his palm to the door frame, not for support but in acknowledgement. His return was not new. He had entered this room once before, in the earliest days when his work still carried urgency rather than reflection. Back then, the air felt sharper, the silence more expectant. Now it simply hovered, letting him move without judgment. The building smelled of paper left in attic heat, fibers weakened, ink settling, memory holding. A single shutter filtered the slanted afternoon sun, and dust motes drifted in a quiet, deliberate descent, unhurried by his intrusion. He placed the box on the table, worn cardboard edges softened by years of shelving. The label was faint but still legible: Cline, Maribel, Personal EFFECTS. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he allowed himself the slow re-entry into detail, letting sensory fragments speak before logic assembled them. The air tasted neutral, a blend of old timber and forgotten belongings. Somewhere in the walls, a heater hummed faintly, steady, almost metronomic. The space seemed to remember him, or perhaps it simply remembered her. When he finally lifted the lid, the room felt even quieter. On top lay a photograph sealed in transparent archival sleeve. Maribel, hair pinned, smile gentle but precise, seated behind the reference desk of Carter County Public Library. The image did not reveal emotion beyond ordinary warmth, yet something in her posture suggested intention, her world built on order, her days arranged in consistent cycles of shelving, assisting, returning, documenting. She had written her own name on the reverse in tidy blue ink, date included, as if she understood that sooner or later someone would need certainty. A faint exhale escaped him, not dramatic, simply present. Memory intersected with fact. He recalled the original interview transcripts, the statements from coworkers, the notes describing her final evening. Maribel locking catalog drawers, preparing returns list, placing a call to confirm a donation pickup the following morning. Nothing irregular, nothing foreboding, merely the rhythm she lived by. He withdrew the next item, a lined journal, pages delicate but intact. Her handwriting was small, even, controlled, no flourishes, no rushed entries. The dates ran continuous until mid-October, then halted. The last line was a simple reminder: review local archive photos for mislabeled collection. No further notation followed. The pen lifted there and never returned. The investigator sat, chair creaking softly under his weight. He traced the journal's spine, a tactile acknowledgement of her routine. He remembered his first assessment, a life defined not by turbulence but by precision. Yet precision could compress thought so finely that meaning became elusive. He turned a page forward, then back, careful not to stress the binding. Outside, a vehicle passed slowly, its sound distant, absorbed by the structure. The house remained insulated, as though decades had thickened its borders. He reached for a manila envelope sealed with brittle tape. Inside, collected statements typed on typewriter sheets now yellowed at edges. He lifted the first. Coworker Ms. Cline was quiet but organized. She seldom spoke of personal matters. He paused, the words familiar yet different when read in this suspended air. Quiet but organized. The phrase appeared throughout the file, repeated by colleagues, neighbors, acquaintances. Quiet was the descriptor, organized the identity. He moved to the second page. Neighbor, she walked each morning at 6:15, precise timing, no deviation. He allowed silence to expand, letting detail settle. Consistency held narrative, but narrative could hold omission. His pen tapped lightly against the table once, then ceased. A small envelope lay beneath the documents, thin, labeled simply, library backroom key. It had been collected from her purse, tagged, cataloged, stored. He held it now, its weight insignificant yet meaningful. The key did not belong here, it belonged in a place she guarded, a room few entered without her approval. A space of sordid history, regional records, forgotten catalogs she spent hours reorganizing. He considered the timeline. Her last recorded movements, library closing at 8, departure noted by 2 staff members. Walk home estimated at 15 minutes. No confirmed sightings after she locked the rear door. And yet the key remained with her, not returned, not misplaced. He stood, his movement minimal, and crossed to the small writing desk near the window. A slight layer of dust covered its surface, but not thick enough to obscure the grain. He unfolded another record sheet, her circulation ledger, meticulously kept. One entry circled in red by early investigators. A local history text requested repeatedly, then placed on hold under Maribel's authority, not for patron circulation but review. He whispered to the room, not expecting reply, only clarity. She kept something. His voice, low, deliberate, vanished into the grain of old plaster. He reviewed the accompanying slip attached with rusting paperclip. Carter County Land Transfer PHOTOGRAPHS, 1957. The folder had been logged, signed out by Maribel 2 days before her disappearance. Not returned. He inhaled quietly, not deeply, not theatrically, just enough to recognize the shift. She had been cataloging, reorganizing, re-identifying mislabeled material. The instruction in her final journal entry aligned with this very collection. Something misfiled, something long overlooked. He opened the archival box beneath the others, expecting only dust. Instead, preserved neatly, lay the photograph set referenced, rural land parcels, boundary markers, transfer records, fields, fences, sun-bleached horizons. Nothing dramatic, but her red pencil marks circled specific frames, precise, intentional. He lifted the first, a wooden boundary sign nearly illegible, her handwritten note beneath, incorrect owner listing, verify county index. Next, a modest property, single-story structure, identical shutter patterns to this very house. He froze, not in alarm but in recognition. Her research traced ownership shifts, records amended without full explanation. This address appeared multiple times in her notes, each time marked with quiet insistence. Not accusation, not implication, just inquiry. He sat again, posture composed. His revisitation now took new frame. Maribel's work was not interruption but continuation. She had followed archival truth, not conjecture. Her disappearance had not emerged from randomness but from record. He turned to the final photograph she annotated. The same house, earlier decade, same window alignment, same porch. Beneath it, her calm script. Verified documentation chain unresolved. He exhaled. The weight of time expanded in the room, not heavy, simply present. This was the moment investigators missed in 1981, not from negligence, but from absence of context. They saw her interest in local cataloging as routine, not as pursuit. He closed the photograph sleeve gently, respecting the precision she lived within. Outside, light faded carefully along the window frame. The dust settled again. He remained seated, journal open, room holding silence that was less empty now and more defined, almost communicative. Maribel's voice existed here, not in sound but in order. Her final actions documented truth, methodical, steady. He reached for the key once more. Smooth metal, edges cool. The library back room awaited its return, its shelves carrying the work she began. The case no longer felt frozen. It felt paused, awaiting completion rather than resurrection. He placed the items back with care, one by one, each aligned precisely as she would have. Nothing dramatic had surfaced, nothing chaotic, only sequence, her sequence. He allowed himself one final glance around the room, not farewell, not closure, only continuation. Justice, when measured quietly, still moved. He stood, the house remaining in tranquil suspension, holding memory without demand. Time had not erased her. It had simply waited. The library back room had not changed since the early documentation photographs. Same narrow aisle, same metal shelving, same air that seemed to absorb sound rather than carry it. When he entered, the light did not flicker or resist. It simply revealed what had been dormant. Dust rested in careful stillness across spines and index drawers, and the smell of stored paper, neutral, unaggressive, almost archival in dignity, met him with the same restraint the house had offered. He paused just inside the threshold, not due to hesitation, but to allow memory, context, and procedure to align. In the corner sat the drawer she had signed out, county documentation, parcel transfers 1953-1962. Its label had faded but remained legible, her original handwriting still pressed into the adhesive strip she replaced so precisely. He pulled the drawer halfway, letting its weight balance, not rushing what time had already waited decades to disclose. Inside lay envelopes, stacked in unimposing succession, yet now charged with intention simply because she had touched them last. He removed the ledger of property catalog corrections she initiated. Each amendment bore her consistent pen, red notations for misfiled parcels, blue for confirmed cross-references, green for items requiring further verification. Only 3 entries were marked in all 3 colors, layered, exact, forming a triad of inquiry that seemed, at first glance, merely administrative. But her precision was not decorative, it was directional. He touched the first verification slip, pressing lightly so the corners wouldn't crumble. She had written, cross-check with courthouse transfer receipts. No urgency, no speculation, just a request for alignment. The second note read, confirm plot boundary discrepancies. Again, no emotion, only accuracy. The third note was the smallest, yet the most decisive. Revisit parcel at East Walker before final classification. He closed the drawer slowly, his reflection appearing faintly on its metal edge. The library clock ticked somewhere beyond the stacks, not loud, not insistent, just sequential. The past had formed its own rhythm here, mirrored by her method. He moved to the microfilm archive cabinet. Inside, reels remained sealed in labeled containers, the older ones marked in her uniform handwriting. The container for 1957 Land Transfer Registry had been opened last by her, the date clearly stamped, October 15, 1981, 2 evenings before her silence began. He loaded the reel, the machine humming with a lifelong familiarity that only public institutions possess. As the film advanced through light and lens, images flickered, parcels, signatures, county stamps, sale transfers. Routine administration. Nothing immediate, nothing narrative. Then a page she had bookmarked. A transfer document for the East Walker parcel, stamp partially overwritten, ownership line amended twice in the same year. Rare but not impossible. However, the handwriting on the amendment did not match the original registrar. Her red marking lay under the discrepancy, not accusing, merely recognizing. Second signature requires authentication. He froze, not outwardly but in thought. Authentication was her language of caution. She would not have written it without basis. The document repeated on a later frame, but this time her green pencil circled the same corner, not the signature but the date. The amendment occurred weeks before the land survey filed under different registry coordinates, suggesting the property changed designation without full procedural recording. Not illegal by itself, but irregular enough to demand catalog review. She had followed procedure. That was all. Procedure led her to the parcel, then to the photographs, then to the drawer where documentation did not align. A sequence, not a coincidence. He leaned back slightly, allowing the machine's hum to fill space where thought needed silence. Her path was steady, not investigative by intent, but investigative by profession. Archivists pursue order. Order sometimes reveals what narrative alone cannot. The memory of his first assignment returned, not heavily but cleanly. He was new, she was gone. The documents felt unremarkable. Now, years later, the same documents held shape because someone had shaped them with purpose. He advanced the reel until a familiar signature emerged. Same registrar, same ink density, same era. He compared loops, angles, flourishes. And there it was. The amendment on the East Walker transfer did not match. Subtle variance but conclusive in trained observation. She had not accused. She had only noted. And sometimes notation is the quietest form of revelation. He printed the frame, the machine releasing paper with a sound that seemed too current for the room's historic calm. The sheet cooled on the tray. He placed it atop her ledger carefully, aligning corners out of instinct or respect. Outside, dusk deepened, casting muted lavender across the high windows. Shadows lengthened but never sharpened. Everything remained softened, as if the library respected the same stillness the house did. He moved to the final drawer she logged before her disappearance. Local history, restricted. Only staff with classification clearance accessed these, and she cataloged them with the same quiet precision she applied to every living detail. He unlocked it with the key recovered from her purse. The drawer opened with no resistance, gliding with a smoothness that felt almost new. Inside lay folders, each labeled with tidy uniformity. But one tab bore her red pencil, barely noticeable unless one expected it. East Walker Survey Expansion, Original PLATS. He lifted it, edges crisp despite age. Inside, survey sketches, measurements, boundary lines. And there on the final sheet, that same small notation she used sparingly. Reconcile before final archive. Not expose, not escalate, just reconcile. He placed the sheet on the reading table, flattening it without force. The sketches aligned with the photographs she circled. Not error, overlap. The property expanded by record but not by ground measurement, meaning transfer rights extended beyond what original plats indicated. A technical irregularity, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. But she did not overlook. She did not dismiss. He closed his eyes not to rest but to reconstruct. She would have walked home with nothing but notes and certainty that catalog order required correction, not confrontation, simply completion. Her final evening became clear, not through speculation but sequence. She discovered amendment irregularities. She logged verification notes. She planned to revisit the parcel records. She left the back room with quiet satisfaction that Monday would bring clarification. That was all. His breath steady met the room's quiet. No revelation of chaos, no sudden unveiling. Just the reality of duty pursued to its final page. He collected the documents she last handled and returned them to their compartments, aligning edges, smoothing corners. Precision was her language. He responded in kind. When he locked the drawer again, the key clicked softly, respectful, final, only in action, not meaning. He stepped back into the main aisle. The light settled once more. The air held no tension, only continuation. Her work did not cause her silence. Her work explained it. Justice in this case existed not in dramatic unveiling, but in understanding that small truth can be as exacting as large. Her notes remained. Her order persisted. Her presence existed in every initialed correction. He walked toward the exit, the library accepting his departure without protest, closing itself again into quiet, preserved chronology. Outside, evening settled over Oklahoma with tempered grace. The street lay unchanged from the photographs she marked. Same angles, same porch lines, same deliberate calm. He paused at the curb, not to look back but to absorb the stillness she once walked through. The case did not flare with revelation. It unfolded with the same steadiness she practiced. Her name remained on the file, not as absence but as method. He would return tomorrow, not for closure but for completion. Justice, when carried without spectacle, still reaches its point. He returned in morning light, quiet in movement, coat gathered but unbuttoned, as if formality belonged only to paperwork, not to memory. The library doors accepted his entry with mechanical ease, hinges steady, glass clean, as though the world had waited politely for the final reconstruction. The building sometimes felt less like a public institution and more like a vessel, holding chronology, intention, and the quiet lineage of every detail Maribel once touched. He walked directly to the records desk. The room carried the scent of early heat and paper fibers warming into gentle release. The lights hummed, never sharp, just constant, a backdrop to investigation without urgency. He placed the files on the counter with deliberate care, stacking them exactly as she had left them on that last evening. Ledger atop, photographs beneath, survey sketches at bottom. The order mattered. She believed order made truth easier to approach. The archivist on duty greeted him with a nod, minimal, fitting. You found what you needed. Not a question weighted by implication, only courtesy. He responded just as spare. She was accurate. It was all that needed saying. Accuracy had been Maribel's quiet identity. She did not present theory. She did not seek outcome. She remedied classification the way others brewed morning tea, simply because it must be done. He studied the counter as though it were a field site rather than polished wood. The grain held faint impressions of decades of stacks, stamps, index cards, elbows resting mid-task. Somewhere in this same space, she would have stood, head gently inclined, reading glasses angled just slightly, indexing transfers and cataloging the connective tissue of local history. The archivist disappeared into the back room to prepare authentication request forms. He waited without impatience. Patience was part of the air now. This case had stretched beyond time anyway. He opened her journal once more, not searching, just acknowledging. The final entry remained as crisp as yesterday. Review local archive photos for mislabeled collection. A reminder, not a warning. The handwriting carried no tremor, no flourish. Even ink placement felt centered. Her final written moment existed without drama, only intention. He traced the indentation her pen left on the page, almost imperceptible but present. There it was, the human imprint beneath the logic. Not loud, not pleading, simply real. When the archivist returned with authentication forms, the investigator placed the printed transfer discrepancy beside them. The mismatched signature sat without spectacle. It did not accuse. It only stood in contrast to documentation rhythm. The archivist examined it, expression unchanged, voice controlled. She noted this. "Yes," he answered, nothing added. The archivist set the paper down with softness rare in administrative review. She always noticed alignment. A pause, not awkward, only reflective, settled between them. Libraries did not chase grand conclusions. They maintained truth through order. She belonged to that order. He returned to the East Walker property once more, only to observe, not to disturb. The house now looked less forgotten and more archived, as though history itself had placed it under protective glass. The sunlight angled across the porch in smooth lines, landing precisely where her red pencil had circled decades earlier. The siding remained calm, windows steady, air unmoved. He walked the perimeter, not searching for anything physical. The truth had never existed in soil or structure, but in her notes, her entries, her cataloging of boundary lines that simply needed reconciliation. The parcel had expanded on record more than on earth. The amendment had been procedural rather than personal, and yet her instinct to align details brought the case to clarity in its own slow, quiet way. He reached the back steps and sat, not heavy, not weary, simply grounding himself in space she once documented. The yard hummed with rural stillness, nothing abrupt, nothing dissonant. A bird crossed the fence line, the sound gentle, unhurried. His reflection did not turn heroic or regretful. Instead, it flowed like careful ink. She had not been defined by her final evening, but by every attentive moment before it. Every circled parcel, every corrected label, every shelf aligned with near mathematical calm. He returned to the library by afternoon, submitting documentation for final reconciliation. This was not closure in narrative terms. It was completion in archival terms. Her work would now finalize as she intended, accurate, reconciled, resolved without spectacle. When he stepped once more into the back room, light eased through the high windows. Dust floated, not heavy, simply present. The shelves greeted him like old colleagues. He rested his hand briefly on the drawer she last opened, not in farewell but in recognition. She did not lead a story of disruption. She led a life of clarity. And clarity, when protected long enough, becomes its own form of justice. He paused before leaving, letting memory and procedure align one final time. The journal remained closed on the desk, key returned, drawer locked, her system intact. There was no dramatic turning point, no sudden unraveling. The case resolved by method, not revelation, exactly as she lived. Outside, evening returned, soft against brick and glass, shadows blending without edge. The investigator stood near the library steps, hands resting at his sides, posture calm. The town continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware that its quiet history had been gently reordered back into accuracy. It did not need to know. She would not have required recognition, only precision. He looked once toward East Walker, not in longing or regret, but in acknowledgement of all that remains steady even in absence. Justice sometimes concludes not with declaration, but alignment. The file bearing her name would close today, yet her handwriting, her catalog marks, her small blue letters dated in corner margins, those remain as part of the archive, preserved without embellishment. He exhaled, the air cool, evening folding into its own contour. Justice had been procedural, memory had been patient, time had been consistent. But somewhere between paper fibers and quiet ink strokes, something human lingered, not demanding attention, only existing with a gentle permanence. The case settled without triumph, without echo, without noise. Sometimes resolution is simply this: a room in order, a name preserved, a truth aligned. And in that stillness, even decades later, she remains,